Something I think that you're not aware of. There's 3 prices on every home that's for sale. Did you know that? And sometimes issues can happen. It's the Real Estate Show. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples, the owner of Zone Realty LLC. Zone your home. 3 prices on every single home that goes on the market. 3 prices? I thought when a seller puts their home on the market, they have a selling price, and that's the price of the house. Well, not necessarily. You see, the 3 prices that I'm talking about is the price that the seller has put the house on the market for, the actual price that the buyer is going to pay for the house, and then there's that 3rd price, and that's the price that the bank is going to appraise the property for. Now, sometimes there could be some issues. Let's talk about the scenario here. You have a house that goes on the market. It could be a residential home, a condo, a multifamily, or maybe even a commercial property. But a property goes onto the market, and the seller has set a price of what they're asking for that property. Now, hopefully they've set that price in consultation with their realtor. They've looked at competitive prices that are out there of like properties and so on and so forth. Or maybe they've just decided that regardless of that, this is what I want for that property, and this is what my sales price is going to be. House goes on the market, along comes the buyer. Buyer looks at the property, they like the property, and they make an offer, what they're willing to pay for the property. And some negotiation goes back and forth, and now you have a situation where the seller and the buyer have agreed on the price for the purchase of the real estate, and you now have a contract. Is the deal done? Well, not necessarily, because as we all know, once an agreement has been made on the price of the home, there are several other steps that must be gone through in order for it to get to what we call a closing. The 3rd price that really tells you whether or not the deal is going to start to move forward is what the bank will appraise the property for. Now, you hope that the bank will do a competitive analysis just like the realtor did. They'll look at comparable sales of like properties that are out there, and they'll come up with a value that matches what the buyer and the seller are going to pay for the home, or agreed contract on the home. Now, here's where some arguments come into play. A lot of people have asked me on appraisal, how come the appraisal has to be the sales price of the home? Wouldn't the appraisal have to be the mortgage amount on the home? After all, isn't that what the bank is loaning? This is true, but you see, the banks don't look at it that way. Regardless of what the down payment is going to be on the home, whether it's an FHA with 3.5% or a conventional with 20% or any kind of down payment, the bank doesn't look at the down payment. The bank is looking at what their total risk to finance that property is going to be, and that is hopefully the contract price on the property. Now, here's where issues could start to happen, because let's say the seller has put it on the market. They've gone a little bit higher than other properties that are out there that are similar. Buyer came along, fell in love with the property, and has offered the asking price for the property. Contract is accepted, and now it's gotten to the appraisal, and the appraisal comes back, and the appraiser is saying, well, hold the phone here, folks. The house or the property is not worth what the contracted amount is. It comes in as a short appraisal. Well, now what do you do? Well, basically, you don't have a real estate contract anymore. The buyer is not going to be able to get the financing that they need in order to make the deal move forward to the closing. Now, what do you do in those particular cases? Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I'll be back after this little presentation to talk a little bit about that. So the buyer has made an offer, the seller's accepted it, and everything's wonderful and great on the home that they wish to purchase. And along comes the bank, and the bank's appraiser goes out there and does an appraisal, and the appraisal doesn't match what the buyer and seller have agreed to as far as the home is concerned. Well, now what happens? Well, I've mentioned on the real estate show in the past, there are a number of different scenarios that can happen. Worst case is that everybody parts company and we don't have a real estate transaction. Best case is one or the other parties agrees to match what the appraised amount is. In other words, the seller says that, well, here's the appraised amount on the property, I'll sell the house for the appraised amount, the buyer agrees, and you continue on moving your deal. Third case scenario is where the seller says, no, I don't believe what the appraiser's saying, I want this amount for my home, this is what we agreed to, this is what you, the buyer, is going to pay me because you agreed to it. Now the buyer has to make the decision as to whether or not they want to make up the difference between the appraised value and what the seller's asking. And this can cause several issues, especially when it comes to a home that's being financed. And I'll be honest with you, if I'm the buyer representative, I'm the realtor that is representing the buyer that's looking to buy the property, I'm not going to advise, and I'm sure a lot of other realtors would agree with me, I'm not going to advise the buyer to overpay for the property. If the bank sets an appraisal on the house, they've done their due diligence, and that's what the home is worth, that's what the buyer should be paying for the property. But again, it pretty much falls in the buyer's pocket as to what they want to do. Most of the time, if it's a reasonable difference, the seller will agree to rechange the price or adjust the price to the appraised value. The buyer agrees to accept that, and you move on. Now, once you've gotten over that issue, are you safe? Are you going to make it to the closing? Well, there could be another issue that comes up, and I'll talk about that after this presentation. So here's the situation that we just discussed before that presentation. A house came on the market, or properties come on the market. The seller has set their price. A buyer came along, made an offer. The seller accepted that offer. That part of the deal is done. The appraisers come out, appraise the home, and in this particular scenario, the appraisal matches the price that the seller and buyer have agreed to. You now have a real estate transaction that's going to move forward to the closing. What other issues can come up? Now, I'm going to talk about surprise issues. We all know that once a contract is put together and the transaction starts to move forward, the buyer has the right to do a home inspection. And we all know that that home inspection thoroughly goes through the property, and if there are any issues, you renegotiate with the seller to have those issues taken care of, reasonable issues. The seller can fix the things that need to be fixed to the buyer's satisfaction. The seller can say, I don't have time to do this, I'll offer a little bit of a credit at the closing so that you, the buyer, can go ahead and take care of those things. or the seller could even lower the price on the home, so to compensate for whatever issues there might be, and the buyer can accept that. So there's a number of different ways you work through that problem. But what I wanted to specifically talk about is what I call the surprise issues. Now, everything has come together, you've negotiated on everything, it looks good, and you're now marching towards your closing. The buyer has successfully secured the funds to purchase the home, got their commitment, the attorneys have set the date, everything is ready for transfer of title. So closing date now becomes firm and you're all ready to go to the closing. It's common practice for the buyer to do what's called a final walkthrough. That's when they go to the property that they're purchasing and they walk through it with their realtor to do two things. Number one, see the property that they're purchasing and make sure that it's still there. And number two, to make sure that anything that was negotiated on has been done to their satisfaction, if it were a situation where the seller agreed to fix something. They're physically going in to verify all that, so they're comfortable with when they go to the closing, everything's been done and they're comfortable with what their purchase is going to be. But sometimes there's surprises. They could be major surprises or minor surprises. Sometimes it's just miscommunication. For instance, a buyer may purchase a home and expect all the appliances to go along with the sale. They get to a particular point where they do their final walkthrough and they discover that the seller has removed the washer and the dryer and the refrigerator and maybe even the stove. So of course they get upset. They say, my offer was to be inclusive of that stuff. Now you're back in a renegotiation because of that misunderstanding. This is why a lot of times realtors will use what they call an inclusion form. It's a form that they've designed that lets the seller say, this is what's included in the sale of the home, and this is what's going with the home when the home sells. If not, you have to make sure that you ask for those items in your offering before it's signed. Washer and dryers, that sometimes is the biggest issue. A lot of times sellers will take their washer and dryer with them, and the buyer thought the washer and dryer was supposed to stay, and you could end up with a last-minute credit being issued or some kind of negotiation as far as those missing things. Some of the other things that can happen that are unexpected is Mother Nature issues. You know, you hope that everything runs smoothly and nothing unexpected happens, but we could have a storm roll through the day before closing and cause damage to a home. There are fire issues that can happen to a home, flood issues, just a number of different things that may happen before you actually close. And those could be the surprise issues. And one of the things that's happened to my clients in the past is a house has been vandalized. The seller's moved out of the house is sitting there vacant, you're a couple of days away from your closing, you go to do the walkthrough and you discover that somebody has broken into the house and stolen pipes or ripped out wires or caused some kind of damage in the home. And again, you have to look at, well, what do we do about that? The house has not transferred title yet. It's still technically the seller's home, so maybe the seller's insurance takes care of the issues. Or, as I said, the attorneys get together, renegotiate everything, and maybe a credit is issued at the last minute in order for the buyer to be able to afford to take care of surprise issues, damage, washer dryer missing, and so on and so forth at that last minute closing. Let's take a look at this, and I'll be back with what I call the real estate mailbag. I'm sitting here filming this show on a really nice day. It's beautiful outside, and I was very tempted to take the camera with me and film outside. But usually when you get a really nice day like today, you get a lot of noise that goes on. Not only the natural noises of the wind blowing through the trees and birds and so on and so forth, but you get lawn mowers and cars going by and those kinds of different things. So I decided to film inside, even though it's such a beautiful day. And I apologize if the microphone is picking up any of those outside sounds, because I do have all the windows open today to let the fresh air in and enjoy such a nice day. We're talking here on this real estate show about the three prices on a home. The price the seller has marketed the home for, what the buyer has offered and been accepted, and what the banks appraised the house for. Those three prices coming together, and the issues that can happen when that doesn't happen, when that doesn't meet, and what do you do? We also mentioned something about issues. My commentary on this show, and it goes along with some of the questions that I get asked here on the real estate show, of what do you do? Well, this is why it's so important to have an attorney involved in your real estate transaction. Your realtor is there to guide you and counsel you through the real estate transaction. But sometimes when you have those last minute issues, the attorneys for each side can get together and come up with what would be a reasonable agreement between the seller and buyer to allow the property to close to everyone's satisfaction. My name is Rick Naples. This has been the Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.